Welcome back to Light the Fuse, the only Mission Impossible podcast currently being recorded in a closet in the San Fernando Valley.
Currently.
Yeah.
There could be others.
Yeah. This is
later today.
Anytime. But this is Drew Taylor, joined by Charles Hood once again.
Hello.
So we're starting off this marathon run of visual effects based episodes, right?
Yeah, we got 5 episodes in a row. We've been talking to a couple of visual effects guys who worked at ILM, one who's currently still working at ILM, and these interviews were awesome. They were really cool. We've been trying to get them on the books for a while, Todd in particular, but we're starting with Stu Maschwitz, who is no longer with ILM, but he was there in the 90s, and it's a fascinating time.
Yes.
I loved this interview. I loved Stu. It was great talking with him about all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. He went on to co-form the Orphanage, which did visual effects for The Host and all these other things that we love.
The Bong Joon-ho host.
And
so, it's a really great interview.
Yeah.
Before we get into it, though, wanted to just talk about, we got a little news updates to discuss.
Okay, go ahead.
Number 1, the CBS Paramount deal.
Oh, yes.
So there's going to be a streaming service, or there's going to be...
Well, there already is a streaming service.
So that's CBS All Access. Yeah. But they made their rights issue, they sorted it out.
Yes.
And they made there was some conference call, right, where there was a quote that said that, Star Trek and Mission Impossible will be spread across all platforms.
Right. Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, it's really exciting. It sounds like a TV show.
It's what we've talked about, right?
Yeah,
like a Disney Plus type model?
Yes, yeah.
Is that what the future is, maybe?
I hope there's video games. I mean, there's...
And will it be... All right, video... So, what are all the platforms?
Well, there's CBS Interactive, which, does video games, licensed things. They run Metacritic and StarTrek.com, things like that. So I hope maybe we'll have a better presence online, maybe some kind of Mission Impossible database officially, which has not ever been done.
Wow.
If they're looking for guys to run it. I'm just going to say.
I know a couple who have nothing else going on and would love to dedicate their lives more to Mission Impossible.
Yes, we really would. We're here for you.
I mean, the streaming series idea is what most excites me. But is this connected to Paramount? So would it be... I guess that's the big question. Will it be connected to the movies, or will it be completely separate?
Well, if we're using the Star Trek Discovery model, which I think that's what we initially thought, that it will connect to the cinematic universe in a way. Because I think that show is... The events of the 2009 Star Trek, affect the show.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Okay.
So they established the Kelvin timeline, which is the JJ timeline, and all that. So I think that these would... play into the movies, and I think you can't really do it separately anymore. Like, you look at all the Disney Plus shows,
right?
Hawkeye and Mandalorian. These are things that are directly related to the cinematic product.
Well, it'd be so easy to do something related that doesn't get in the way. Because I'm very curious to know what Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie think about this.
Yes,
if they're not excited about this because they have the Mission Impossible franchise and they're kind of running it. However, if you did something like if Paula Patton and Maggie Q don't make it into the next movie for whatever reason, you could just give them their own series and they can just run with that and just do missions.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to really get in the way of the movie series.
Right. I think we both have talked about how malleable and elastic this brand is and how it could go in a lot of different directions.
And they haven't done it yet. And maybe we can get our middle management bosses show.
Yeah. Yeah. Our workplace comedy about... Just
Kittredge is in there.
Just paperwork and
Swanbeck. The 3 of the key. Just imagine Anthony Hopkins, Lawrence Fishburne, and Henry Czerny going at it.
Yes, I can imagine it. I would love it. But
it's what we need.
I would say an Ilsa miniseries is something that should be explored. White Widow.
But that's what I wonder. Like, those characters, are they going to be saved for the movies? And they'll be a little more precious about whether or not they go into the show. I'm just very curious. I can't wait to get McQuarrie again on the show so we can talk to him about the stuff to see.
We'll talk it out. But I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't do an Ilsa miniseries about where she was in between movies.
Right.
I don't think they're going to be like, okay, Simon Pegg can't do a show because he's in the movies.
Right.
Even at Comic-Con they were talking about how the WandaVision show will feed into Doctor Strange too. So I feel like there's a lot of synergistic possibilities here, and I think that the CBS Viacom deal is good for... But what was interesting was that how many people reacted both on my personal Twitter and the show's Twitter that they were not happy.
Oh, that's true. A lot of people were not happy about this news.
Yeah.
They do not like the idea of a TV show for Mission Impossible right now.
No, which is so bizarre.
So interesting. I mean, it started as a TV show.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it needs to get in the way of the movies. I don't think... I guess people are afraid that it could dilute the brand of the movie. You know, if it's not done right, it's true. Like, you know... I don't think Bad Robot's really associated with Paramount anymore, right? So
no, I think they still have projects that are in development.
Right.
But
that's the big question
that's true.
too.
They're moving to Warner Media. Yes.
Right. So like, will Bad Robot not be a part of this?
Right.
Because that would be a thing I think that would make people feel better about it.
Right.
If Bad Robot was involved in producing the show,
I
and
feel
if
like
they're
they
not,
would.
it's going to be very important to see who they get to run the show. To take the reins.
Well, I mean, a number of the people associated with the movies have run TV shows before, between Kurtzman, Orsi,
right.
Applebaum, Nemec. These are all TV guys. So
right. And they wrote MI3 and Ghost Protocol.
I could very much see them taking over a new show.
Right.
You know, and the other thing is, like, I think you and I come from the position of being so starved for anything like extra in the Mission Impossible universe that we are just so excited for this possibility. Even.
Yeah, but people I think are afraid of of diluting it, I guess.
Yeah. I just think that you can't, today in 2019, you can't launch a Mission Impossible product that is not, like, top tier. So I'm very confident that this will be great. I think CBS All Access has a lot of great stuff between The Good Fight and Twilight Zone and the Star Trek stuff. I think that they've got a good track record, so I'm feeling very optimistic.
Are the Star Trek shows good?
Yeah.
Isn't Michelle Yeoh headlining one of them?
Yeah, she's going to be in one, I think, next year. And then we've got the Picard show, which looks great.
I mean, that's cool.
Yeah. And there's an animated show called Lower Decks about the kind of, like, the
people in
the
Lower Decks.
people in Lower Decks. Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think...
If we could do something like that.
Yeah, do it, you know?
Anything else related to streaming service? I've got another...
No, I'm very excited.
Another bite of news to talk about.
Okay.
On Twitter, someone straight up asked Christopher McQuarrie if Rob Hardy will be back as cinematographer. And... or is he going to bring in new people? It sounds like Rob Hardy will not be back.
Right.
He's going to get a new cinematographer and give the movie a new look.
But at the same time, he said some people would be back.
Yes.
In a different tweet.
Yes. So as we've talked about, we assume Eddie Hamilton will be back.
We assume Eddie and Lauren will be back.
We hope that will be the case. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure. We love both those guys.
Yes.
And so maybe a new cinematographer, sounds like.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. I mean, I like that. I mean, I love Rob Hardy's work. Obviously love Elswit's work.
Yeah.
Elswit's one of my favorite cinematographers ever. So I don't know if, I guess, a part of me was almost hoping maybe Elswit would come back, but it sounds like he's just going to give it a new look.
Right. Somebody floated on our Patreon chat today, Hoyt von Hoytman, which...
Is it Hoyt von Hoytema?
Hoytema?
I don't know how to pronounce his name. He did, Interstellar?
Interstellar. He's doing Tenet now.
Yeah.
He did Spectre. So I could see him coming on board.
But he's doing the new Nolan spy movie,
yeah,
right?
That's Tenet.
That's Tenet, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he...
I don't know.
I mean, yeah. It'll be interesting to see who McQuarrie
Or it could be somebody
taps.
totally not unrecognizable, but someone who we're not thinking of top of mind. That could still be a great choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't know anything. Even though we talk to these guys a lot, we don't know who's coming back. But we're very excited.
We'll try to milk them for info, but we got nothing for you right now. Sorry.
No, nothing right now. This is not... We're not in the know at all.
We'll work on that.
Yeah.
Last piece of news.
Okay.
Tom Cruise was seen paragliding.
True.
Everyone, we were talking about this with the guys on the Skype chat from our Patreon earlier today. The paragliding, everybody assumes, it must be training for a stunt for a new movie. We posed the question, is it Tom Cruise just on vacation?
Yeah, he does not have an on switch. I think we know that.
I think it is. I think it is for a stunt.
Yeah.
I think it is. I think they're going to probably paraglide through something really dangerous in the next Mission Impossible.
Like, yeah, you think it might be like a city.
A city, maybe, yeah, and actually do it. Unlike, at MI3, they did a lot of visual effects to have him parachute through Shanghai or whatever. But maybe he'll actually do something like that.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting, too, is that the camera people are going to also have to do this. Because you have to get him doing it in a way that is believable and visceral.
Yeah. The mandate is that you can see it's Tom Cruise's face and see that he's actually doing it.
Right.
Which is why they can't do the squirrel suit things.
Yes.
Where you can't see their face.
Right. So there's got to be every cameraman who is also a paraglider is probably getting a phone call right now about, can you do this? Yeah,
or there's going to probably also have some kind of special rig.
Yeah.
To the paragliding. I don't even know what to call it. Paraglide?
Apparatus?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean...
It's exciting.
It's exciting to think about. And this is us going back to like seeing him with short hair in between movies. We would always say, oh my God, he's going to do another one. He's got short hair, you know. This is that kind of same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah.
What kind of haircut will he have? My thing is like if we see him going to a barber, you know, that'll be...
Then you know. Yeah, we got a new mission.
We got a new mission and we got a new look. Yeah.
That's it.
So that's it? Okay, we'll come back at the end of the episode and we'll wrap things up. But here's our first part with Stu. What's Stu's last name?
Maschwitz.
Stu Maschwitz. So for one of 3. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
And it's awesome. We talked about so much cool stuff.
Today we have a really special guest who we're really excited about. Stu, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Stu Maschwitz, and among my, I guess, many roles, I've been a visual effects artist, including at ILM in the kind of mid to late 90s. But I also, I do all kinds of stuff, don't I? I'm a filmmaker. I wrote a book called The DV Rebels Guide about kind of low-budget action filmmaking. I work with a company called Red Giant to make plugins for video editing and visual effects, and created a screenwriting app called Slugline, and I love movies. How's that?
Great. I mean, I think any of those things probably qualifies you to be on this podcast, but the reason specifically we're talking to you today is that you worked on the first Mission Impossible.
I sure did, yes, in my kind of still finding my footing days at ILM. Yeah, that was one of my early projects there.
So what sequences were the sort of big sequences for ILM on that first movie? Obviously the train chase at the end, but what else?
Well, it was that and the, I think it's 2 mask pull-offs that happen in the movie. There were probably a couple other miscellaneous things. There were some fun little one-offs, including, in the Langley sequence, the knife that falls in glorious, agonizing slow motion towards the floor was CG. And so were a couple of the just kind of like establishing shot airplane exteriors, showing like passenger jets. But yeah, the main thing... The most Mission Impossible-y things that ILM was doing at the time were the 2 mask reveals and then the channel, helicopter and channel sequence, which is what I worked on.
So what went into the mask reveals? Because did Rob Bottin did the makeup? Like, was it?
Yeah, that's
like a
right.
Collaboration with him, or how did that go?
It was indeed, and I think the thing to kind of remember about what visual effects were like back then, we were still in this period of kind of transitioning from ILM's, optical and practical, history into the world of CG, right? So for example, visual effects plates were still shot on VistaVision for the exact same reason that they would have been shot that way for the optical processing, to give a little more resolution so that you could, optically duplicate the shot and still cut it in and have it match. The belief was at the time, because of the nature of the scanning technology that was available at the time, that the extra resolution of VistaVision was necessary for even a digital visual effect. So I mentioned that just to kind of set the context of like, when a visual effects shot was going to be filmed, an entirely different camera would show up. So it was there was a lot of pomp and circumstance around visual effects, and it was, so there would be this kind of sense of like all hands on deck. Like we are, just imagine the production of like Rob Bottin with a John Voight mask, John Voight sitting there in that dramatic lighting in the, baggage car set. And the effort that would have gone into like matching, the positions of his face and Tom Cruise's face and just their motions and everything. it's funny because in another movie, all of that might add up to the shot feeling kind of stiff and awkward. But of course, that style is so Brian De Palma that it's just awesome and it totally works. And the shots are still amazing and still hold up. But they were worked on, by visual effects artists at ILM. I think Greg Maloney may have worked on that second one, the John Voight one, for many, many, many weeks. Just absolutely like surgical level, mini little morphs, fixing little pieces. The amount of attention to detail that went into those shots, it was like everything was a science project back then, and everything was like can we do this, including those shots? And there was no plan B. There was no real fallback other than cutting away. And the whole point was to not do that. So it was, it was just weeks and weeks of difficult work by very talented artists who had no proof that there was a finish line that was possible given the technology and the tools that they had. So I was sitting in the room with the guys who were doing those shots, and it was just every day I would just sit and watch them solve some new hairy problem of, oh wait, this is overlapping that, or oh, I can see a seam here, or whatever it is,
Were you on set for that then? For the shooting of that?
No, I wasn't. I just to also set the stage here, so I was like a kid, basically. I was I'm very fortunate and there was some amazing kind of right place, right time, but I graduated from Cal Arts in 94, and so Jurassic Park had just happened and the world was changing, and Cal Arts had a little tiny computer graphics kind of program that was based on computers that had been donated by ILM. And in my second to last year, my teacher and one of my fellow students left to go work on Casper and Jumanji at ILM. And in my fourth year of Cal Arts, they came back and they were recruiting basically. And they kind of just said, hey, you should probably apply at ILM. We think you would get along well there. I was 21 years old. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I kind of lied on my resume about how much I knew about Unix and programming and things like that. It was still a very technical time, but I had a demo reel of basically just the visual effects from the short films that I had made at school. So I was super junior, like junior beyond belief. But I managed to do okay lighting shots for Casper and kind of caught the eye of Dennis Murin, who liked my lighting. And then what wound up happening, there was a transition at ILM where the computer graphics department was going from 30 people to 300 people because they were going from, doing Casper and Jumanji simultaneously, then right into Dragonheart and Congo and, what else was going on? Twister was, I think, already on the horizon at that point. Small Soldiers. This was back when someone like Steven Spielberg would hire ILM, pay ILM to do like a 2-minute test of a proof of concept to see if you could even make a movie based on an idea that required visual effects that hadn't been done yet. So I worked on a...
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild. And I saw that all firsthand. I worked on a test, sort of proof of concept test for Small Soldiers. And then Habib Zargapur was working on the famous kind of teaser trailer test for Twister. So it was a wacky time of incredible requirements coming from the clients and not enough people who knew how to do it. And I kind of geekily, awkwardly squirted my way into that of like, hey guys, I'm willing to work really hard even though I have no idea what I'm doing. So I was... And all of the crew from Casper wanted desperately to work on Dragonheart because kind of the trajectory that ILM was on was, hey, we're making the title characters of these movies. And to go from doing character animation on Casper to doing photorealistic creature character animation on Dragonheart, that was where 99% of the crew wanted to go. But I had walked by a room and seen a shot looping on one of the playback. This was back, you couldn't just play back the shot on your own computer. You had to go to a special room where they had the machine that could do that. They were like Abacus digital disc recorders, like sitting in special rooms, and that's where you'd have dailies. So I was walking by one and I saw this test shot that turned out to have been rendered in electric image on a Mac by John Knoll, which would actually be a prescient kind of glimpse into my future, but of different colors of helicopter flying down a tunnel. And I was like, I went to my manager and I said, whatever that helicopter in the tunnel movie is, that's what I want to work on. And they're like, great, you're on. Like, and
wow,
yeah, it was, and it was, if you look at the credits, the ILM credits, it's a pretty small crew. We were all basically in one room, and it was the same room that like Jurassic Park had been done in. So we felt this very strong kind of cool connection, or maybe I'm retroactively applying that sensation now, but of being kind of connected to important parts of ILM history. But I've always loved, action movies of all kinds. But to me, like the helicopter is like, it's such an important instrument in the action movie orchestra, and like, so the idea that a helicopter was going to fly into a tunnel, it was actually like, it was like that thing where you hear a song and you feel like you've heard it before. I was just like, oh, this is like, I was born to do this. Like, I've got to be on this movie. And so I kind of weaseled my way onto it. So I was not going to be on the set, but what wound up happening is that I got along really well with the visual effects supervisor, John Knoll. We had a lot of kind of interests in common, and we talked a lot about our opinions about how this helicopter should perform and move and things like that, and so it was kind of the first show where I thought, okay, maybe I actually belong here. Like maybe I'm actually going to be okay at this job, and it was largely due to a lot of wonderful support by John and folks like Joe Letteri, who has gone on to be an amazing rock star in the visual effects world, but he already was then writing our RenderMan shaders to render the helicopter, and George Murphy, who was the kind of compositing supervisor, who I look back at that sequence, and it's a lot of stuff that we take for granted now, but it was all very, very, very difficult at the time, and I. Even though I wasn't on the set, I heard a lot of stories about it, and it was pretty incredible what they went through.
Well, how did you settle on a red helicopter?
I think it was. I honestly, I assume those tests must have been happening while John was on the set, because they actually did have a practical that. They call it a NOTAR, right? It's a no-tail rotor helicopter, which was kind of a newish thing at the time, I think. They actually did have one that they shot, and I think John was just really interested in, what was going to work visually for this helicopter in the tunnel, and I think it just kind of popped and looked great, and it was one of the choices that was available. I think black and red were the two that that they could get, and so I just remember thinking that was kind of funny that John's approach to, hey, let's pick a color for the helicopter. He's like, great, I'll just do a completely realistic visual effects shot like on my laptop while I'm, shooting plates in Scotland, and send it back to ILM so that someone can actually see it playing back in real time.
Well, do you want to talk about like what went into that shot, because there was the full-size helicopter. Did you ever work with the model? The sort of scale model, and can you talk about what went into that, and then sort of putting that all together?
Yeah, sure. So again, getting back to kind of the idea that everything was a bit of a science project at the time, the theory that they went into this with was that they would shoot the practical helicopter they would shoot the practical helicopter kind of at speed. Like if you take like kind of a typical shot looking back down the train, the terrain is whipping by. The whole point is it's the TGV, so it's going, 200 something miles an hour, and so the idea was that they would actually shoot two plates. They went into it, John went into it thinking like, I'm going to do this as practically as possible. A CG helicopter was not in the plan initially. It was all going to be basically split screens. So they would shoot the helicopter at 24 frames per second doing its performance, and then the train tracks whipping by would be undercranked at like 6 frames per second, and then they would be split together. And that immediately kind of fell apart because an undercranked helicopter looks bad. So the split was necessitated, but the split required perfectly straight train tracks, which they could almost never find, and it was boring to look at when they did find it. And they couldn't get the practical helicopter close enough to the camera to get the dramatic angles that the sequence called for. So, wow. So it was a total, like, John kind of calling an audible on the set of like, all right, guys, we're just going to do a CG helicopter. And then, of course, the other crazy thing about it is that, every single shot is, they built 2 of these train cars on a set in London, I think, but the crazy thing about it was that they created this ridiculous air mover system that could blast air at the actors at an appropriate speed to do that thing where your, mouth inflates and your cheeks are like flapping, it was an amazing engineering feat. That then combined with a pretty new thing at the time, which was being able to flash the lights in a programmed sequence so that it looked like, the lighting was moving at hundreds of miles an hour.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it was all... the thing I remember John telling me, the 2 things that I remember him telling me was that they had to have this incredible multi-level filtration system on the intake, bringing the air in, because basically, like, if a tiny, like piece of bird poop like flew into this system, it would be shot into Tom Cruise's face at 200 miles an hour and it'd be like a bullet, So it doesn't seem like it because it's a visual effects heavy sequence, but what you're seeing in Mission Impossible is absolutely the beginnings of Tom Cruise, willingness / insistence on doing dangerous things and doing his own stunts and being extremely present and involved in the filmmaking process above and beyond what most actors would consider to be part of their job, right? So I remember John saying, like, Tom Cruise would be hooked into some kind of wire harness. Like, there's that crazy shot where he kind of winds up flipping up and over and landing on his belly on the facing the other direction on the train, and the camera pushes in on him to kind of show that it's him. So
yeah, that shot is awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's insane, and of course it's got, wire work that has to be painted out, an amazing kind of job of like tracking and all that stuff. But the other thing is, it's Tom Cruise doing this crazy flip thing and landing on his gut on this set, and after every single take, he would have the stunt crew unhook all of his wires. He would climb down off the train. He would go over to the monitor and watch the playback with, everybody, John and Brian and everybody, and like study it and say, okay, I can do it better. I can make it look better. And he'd be back up there, not even asking anybody if they thought, it was like if they thought they had the take they wanted. And John said, like, he's standing next to Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise has these like open slits in the side of his shirt to accept the cables that are hooked into his harness, and John's like looking at Tom, and Tom is like bleeding, like he's got cuts and scrapes, and like he's like bleeding. And he's like, okay guys, let's do it again. So wow. So it was I didn't realize it at the time, but like I was seeing kind of the origin story of Tom's relationship to the stunts in these movies. And
that is amazing.
Yeah, it was neat, because I think at the time we all were still, this was the 90s, like Tom Cruise was a different presence in movies at the time, you know, and we think of him as, you know, just the kind of glorious history of his kind of 80s films, right? And like, and he was transitioning into kind of like Tom Cruise 2.0, I think, in that time. And it was that thing of like, wow, you really gotta hand it to this guy. Like he is going for it.
Wow.
So
did the oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
yeah,
you
go
go.
ahead.
No, ask your question, please.
I was just gonna ask you to like, what was the scale model and what was it used for? Because we've seen photos of this model of the little helicopter and the little tunnel and ILM guys shooting that.
Yeah,
I assume it's ILM guys who shoot that model work.
It was, yes, that was all done at ILM. It was that part of the process, I think, was always part of the plan. It was used exclusively for the explosion at the end. So the channel itself was actually rendered in CG, as well as the helicopter for all the interior channel stuff leading up to the explosion, at which point there's kind of a handoff to the practical model. And they had about at least 100 feet of track laid, and there was kind of a carriage rig that could hold the helicopter a fixed distance from a high-speed camera, and then that whole thing would run down the tunnel. And they set that all up in the back lot of ILM. And the rig could essentially kind of detonate the pyro and then retract the little arm that the helicopter was hung on. But there was still a big track running down the middle of the shot. So if I remember right, I think there was essentially kind of a CG kind of replacement track rendered to kind of patch over the part that was where the gap was for the little arm. But it made for the most amazing dailies I think I'd ever seen. The thing to try to set the context here. So ILM was in San Rafael at the time, very much an extension of the Lucas Empire. In fact, the theater that we would watch dailies in, which was called C Theater because it was in C Building, was the first THX theater. It was kind of the prototype for the Stag Theater at the ranch. And it was, of course, rigged to project VistaVision. So every day that they'd shoot the helicopter, you know, I wasn't involved in the miniature shooting, but I was involved in trying to match the lighting of it to our CG helicopter. And so I'd go to these VistaVision dailies, and you would see, you know, like Steve Gawley's hand, like, you know, in agonizing slow motion, like releasing from the helicopter, and then all of a sudden, like everything would start moving, and it took forever, you know, like a 10-second take takes minutes to watch, and then all of a sudden there'd be this sweet spot where it looked absolutely totally realistic, and then the helicopter would blow up in some beautiful way, and then the arm would retract, and then the helicopter would catch on the arm and it would do something stupid, and everyone would be like, okay, we'll go back today and we'll fix it, you know. but for that brief little moment, you were looking at like the most glorious, beautiful, you know, double the resolution of, you know, it was like watching an IMAX movie about this miniature helicopter blowing up for minutes, you know. It's such an amazing way to start the day.
What was the size of the helicopter scale about approximately?
The body of the helicopter would be the size of like a really good sized watermelon, you know. So maybe the whole thing was like 3 feet long, you know. And so, of course, it had to have like real spinning rotors, like, you know, it was a glorious, beautiful thing. And they were incredibly labor intensive and expensive to build. They did wind up keeping one of them not blown up. I'm pretty sure it's still hanging from the ceiling in John's office.
Awesome.
But what they would also do is they would re-blow them up. Like they would patch it back together and do the shot again, even so they knew they couldn't use the head of the shot. But maybe they'd get some juicy bit. It was actually kind of like it exploded better after it had exploded a few times, you know.
Wow.
And so I remember seeing some takes where they were like trying to milk the last little bit of explodability out of one of the precious helicopter models. But yeah, I mean, the thing was huge, and the track was huge. And is a good friend of mine, George Hull, was the art director on the project at ILM, and he designed the interior of the channel. And so, it was a cool case of like, we were figuring out how to render the channel using geometry instancing and that kind of stuff, while they were building the exact same blueprints practically. So we had their lighting reference to match, and there was a lot of crosstalk between the departments. It was this wonderful time where you could be kind of scratching your head on a problem, and you could just walk across the parking lot into the model shop and just see how they were attacking some detail of the model, and you could go back and do the same approach. And there was a lot of back and forth like that. It was a pretty magical time to be able to have, both of those disciplines happening in a real collaborative spirit, with nobody feeling like anyone was like stepping on each other's roles in the industry or anything like that.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you're shooting with a high speed camera. And is that to shoot super slow motion? Is that the?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah,
but in the final picture, it's normal 24 frames, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a kind of a formula that you use to figure out kind of the correct, if you think about like, okay, Godzilla drops a train car, he's 80 meters tall. How long does it take the train car to fall to the ground? And then if you got a 5-foot dude in a Godzilla costume and he drops a model train car, it takes, considerably less time. There's actually a mathematical formula that you can use to kind of figure out, okay, how much should you overcrank so that your miniature Godzilla train takes the exact right amount of time to fall. And then inevitably what you wind up doing is fudging that a little bit. But yeah, it's all about giving the miniature helicopter kind of weight and the sense of realism. But that inevitably runs into conflict with the sense of trying to create like action and urgency in the shot, right? So what winds up happening is these miniature shoots are kind of these crazy, like intense, like hours and hours of prep, and then in person it's like zip bang done. And you have no idea what you got. And you look at the video playback, but the video playback is at 30 or 24 frames per second. And so you see like a blurry thing and then a thing. And you're like, and it all, by the way, happened in a tunnel. You have no idea what happened. So those VistaVision dailies were like, they were, everyone had their fingers crossed, like, did we get it kind of moments, because you just don't know, And it's a day later that you're finding out. So it was a lot, in a way, like rendering, like we would render the helicopter, overnight, and in the morning you'd show up to dailies and your shot would play in front of everybody, and it would be, if there were any problems or whatever, they would be shown right in front of everybody, unless you made friends with the visual effects editors and they were kind enough to not include your shot in dailies if it had such a really terrible mistake in it. But and that could really happen easily because ILM's pipeline was not really designed for hard surface models, is the term that we would use for things like spaceships and helicopters and stuff like that. It was really designed for creatures. So even just something as seemingly simple as like the motion blur on the helicopter blades actually required a pretty elaborate solution of kind of duplicated instanced geometry, because RenderMan at the time did not like to render curved motion blur. And so, it was such to think about the idea that rendering just a helicopter flying through the air would be, something that would kind of require like the greatest minds in computer graphics to figure out these problems is a bit wild, but that was the situation back then.
So speaking of, I assume this would be a thing, speaking of curved motion blur, a lot of the visual effects movies of the day, like Jurassic Park and The Shadow, were shot flat. They weren't shot scope, like anamorphic.
Yeah.
But Mission Impossible, Brian De Palma is shooting anamorphic for this. How much of a pain was it doing all the visual effects with anamorphic lenses, which gives that kind of warp in the frame?
So much of a pain that they did not attempt it. That film joins like a proud tradition, going back to Blade Runner and Ghostbusters and Star Wars of primary live action shot anamorphic, but visual effects shot VistaVision. So
wow, okay,
yeah.
Is that what I don't know if do you know Die Hard did they also do the same thing? They shot VistaVision for the VFX stuff. They did like building stuff and
so a lot of the Die Hard opticals I think were done by Boss Film. Is that right? Or I can't remember exactly who did it, but I mean it's my favorite movie, so I should know.
Me too.
But it was either Boss Film, Richard Edlund, Ghostbusters, and many other notables. Their preferred format was 65 millimeter. So not the like horizontal IMAX, but the vertical kind of 65 millimeter negative. That's what they would use. And ILM would use VistaVision. A lot of that was to do with just simply the fact that ILM owned all of the VistaVision cameras and was at the point where they needed to make their own, whereas Richard Edlund had kind of bought up all the 65 millimeter stuff. So either way, the theory was the same, to have a really big juicy negative. But yeah, the other thing was it puts you into different lenses. You're not shooting anamorphic, so the geometry of everything changes. And weirdly, it was kind of the beginning of like using a large format camera to shoot visual effects sequences. But I'm trying to think of a example where maybe you would really notice this, like a film where the sort of anamorphic photography is particularly juicy. I mean, I guess the funny thing about it was like when the time came to light up the headlight of the helicopter in the channel. Of course, we put anamorphic lens flares on it to match in with the rest of the photography, even though nothing in that shot was shot with an anamorphic lens. So,
okay.
Yeah, so we were kind of keeping up the illusion of that this was all one kind of cohesive visual thing. But I mean, it's certainly, what folks do today in terms of like inserting visual effects into anamorphic shots and matching the lens distortion, matching the kind of spatial distortion of those lenses, as well as the defocusing characteristics. That would have been more than we could have done at the time. And to work on every once in a while, a 35 millimeter shot would need to be worked on in the ILM pipeline, and they would scan those shots at 4K because they were concerned about duplicating grain. So ILM's pipeline was largely 2K or under for the VistaVision stuff because the negative was so juicy that you actually didn't need to reach in and grab every little available piece of grainy detail. But on 35, you would have to. So.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so just I mean, for any folks who are kind of steeped in the current world of visual effects, like all this stuff probably sounds just absolutely loopy. But ILM had a unique value proposition in many things back then in terms of what they were capable of doing. But one of them was just simply scanning in a piece of film and putting it back onto negative and having you not know that anything ever happened to it. Like not a lot of people could do that back then. So Josh Pines in the film scanning department back then, like they were also innovators and working to make everything, that whole pipeline possible.
Wow.
Well, so the two big mask poles, were they not shot anamorphic? Were they shot on VistaVision? They
were shot VistaVision.
So that one at the very beginning of the movie, where the big reveal, Tom Cruise, where he rips off the mask, is that one of them?
Yep. It's that one, and then John Voight to Tom Cruise at the end.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, different time.
So all the shots of the knife going down were all VistaVision then too, right?
I believe so, yeah. Okay. And that was a fun thing because that was John is such an amazing talent. Like, you know, he's the visual effects supervisor who the only reason he's not doing your job as an artist is that there's just not enough of him. So he did those shots on his Mac in Electric Image. He was, and I would go visit him in his office, and he'd be like, you know, hey, what do you think? I got this knife falling through the frame. You think it looks good? And I'm like, you're the boss. So like, you tell me. I think it looks amazing.
What about the aquarium sequence? Was there any work that ILM or you had to do on that sequence?
Not a bit.
Really?
There. As far as I know, if there are any visual effects in that sequence, ILM didn't do them. But I don't think there are. I don't think there's a single augmentation. I mean, it's a funny...
There's a wire, right, pulling somebody out the window. There's that one guy who gets thrown through the window. I figured maybe you'd have to clean up some wire work there or something.
It's possible. Yeah, if that's the case, I don't think it was done at ILM.
So that was Stu's first installment. Great. I love talking to this guy.
Yeah. It's
Coming to ILM,
fascinating to hear about ILM at that time.
Going from optical to digital.
Yeah.
From practical to CG. I mean, it's just a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And the amount of things he contributed to is really stunning.
Yeah.
We'll get into that more later, but...
Yeah. But thank you to everybody at our Patreon. So please sign up for our Patreon. A big thank you to everyone there who's helping us out. We love you. This episode is brought to you by Jeremy Dillon. And a big thank you to Thomas Jeffroy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this episode's also mixed by Luke Burson.
And remember to like, subscribe, rate, review wherever you're listening to this. And come back next week for part 2.
Yeah, and check out on Friday on Twitter, we do Freebie Friday. We do a little, anybody who writes a review and gives us a screenshot, the first person to do it after we tweet this prompt, we give them a free digital copy of one of the Mission Impossible movies.
So there's that, too.
So, yeah.
All right.
Good times.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. And before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcasts@gmail.com. If you'd like to watch the original Mission Impossible television show, all 7 seasons are currently available to stream on Amazon Prime. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.